Hello and welcome to another episode of the Self-Made Podcast. In this one, I'm really excited to bring you Andrew Coates. Andrew is someone that I took notice of over the course of the lockdown, just for his fantastic social media content and his ability to bring things into really succinct short format that gets tons and tons and tons of shares. After sharing my first bit of content from Andrew myself, I was impressed how authentic that he was. They immediately responded with a very, very personal voice note, and from then we have got chatting back and forward over the last few months. So his authenticity is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring him onto the podcast, and we speak about that in length. How he built his social media presence, what that means to his business, what we think of the industry, and he name drops a ton of people that you should go and listen to. It's very, very clear from this interview how authentic and how much of a love of this industry Andrew has, and he really generally is one of those people that just wants to give back to the wider community. This in itself is part of the reason why he's become so popular so quick, because even through very, very short written posts, it's very easy to see how genuine this man is, and this has been a massive, massive reason why he's scaled his business and his social media presence up so fast. If you're somebody that wants to improve your business through social media, through writing, through content creation, through podcasting, this is a great listen to for you. Also, alternatively, if you're someone that wants to get more out of their human interactions, more out of their conversation on a day-to-day basis, there's tons of great lessons you can learn from this interview to speak about how being authentic and genuine is much, much better and will get you much further reach most of the time than trying to portray somebody who you're not or portray your highlight reel. So I won't speak much longer. I will leave you with myself and Andrew Coates Fitness. So for anyone who doesn't know who you are, Andrew, tell us a little about yourself and who you are in the industry.
Thanks for having me on, by the way.
No problem.
I have been a personal trainer for 10 and a half years. Gym floor, doing tons and tons of work there. And somewhere along the lines, I went out, I was about 6 years in. So for the last 4.5 years, I've been an independent contractor owning my own business out of a gym called Evolve Strength. Given the circumstances of the last year, I also set up a home studio to be able to operate when the main gyms had been closed down. And I started a podcast almost 4 years ago. I started fitness writing maybe around the same sort of time. And along the way, I got the attention of Testosterone Nation, T Nation. So I started writing for them 2.5 years ago. And that has led to writing for the Personal Trainer Development Center, Generation Iron, True Coach, and there's at least one more to be released. It's on hold, waiting for their publishing to get kind of sorted out. And who knows what future opportunities. So writing is something I really enjoy. And then I decided, all right, let's pay some attention to social media to match all the other stuff I've been into. And, the last year and a half, I've applied that, a lot of stuff to Instagram, social media reach and growth. And so that's kind of blown up too.
So, interesting you mentioned the PDTC and T Nation and stuff that I very much followed very early on through my career and still do. I've just got a little bookmark icon on my phone to go to T Nation whenever I want to. So most coaches that will listen to this will know of those companies. How did you end up going from where you were to sort of get into that world in terms of writing for those places?
I remember reading T Nation every morning with my breakfast, whatever had been published for years, especially early in my career. Reading people like Brian Cron, Lee Boyce, Tony Gentilcore, Dean Somerset, et cetera, people who've all somehow through the either all become friends of mine. And funny, I started working for this company as a trainer, and then you see the monthly session totals and sales in the company, and here's this Dean Somerset guy who also happens to be Dean Somerset on T Nation, the same dude. So small world, right? Mm-hmm. And I always thought of there being sort of two stratifications of trainers. There's the gym floor everyday trainer, and then there's this mystical elite tier of people who appear on publications like T Nation and the known people in the industry leaders. And you spend more time in the industry, and depending on how you approach it, you realize that those arbitrary distinctions are bullshit. And you can work toward, especially now more than ever, being able to do some of those same sort of things, right? I would listen to the Fitcast by Kevin Larrabee and Danny Lennon's Sigma Nutrition Radio, which is a really good one. and think, oh, wow, wouldn't that, be kind of cool? You always sort of imagine having a podcast, but you never really do it. Oh, always imagine Ready for Teenage, you never do it. And then all of a sudden my buddy, Dean Guido, is like, hey, do you want to do a fitness podcast? Sure. Okay, cool. And next, we're talking to Mike Isertel and Brett Contreras and Jill Coleman and Jordan Syed and Martin Rooney and everyone else up and down the industry, John Berardi, right? So very cool. It becomes a really good vehicle to connect with people. In addition, I started traveling to fitness conferences back in 2017, and I'm planning a couple this year to go to, and you go to these conferences and all of a sudden, so, me and Dean Somerset, we both contracted out of Evolve Strength. So along with the owner of Evolve Strength, we decided a couple of years ago to start doing our own conference. So, well, we did that. And sort of the point of all this is you will only be limited by the arbitrary boundaries and limits you place on yourself and what you're capable of. If you approach the industry, there's always a few people who do this, like, well, there's a Fit Pro circle jerk and who gives a shit, and it's all about the client in front of you. Well, I get that sentiment. I mean, the client in front of you is the most important person, but there's also a lot of value and benefit in networking with like-minded people on the same journey you are, same career ambitions. And it doesn't exactly hurt you when someone is looking around for potential trainers to see, well, this guy works at this commercial gym, whereas this guy, this guy is actually an international speaker and appears on a lot of podcasts and hosts a conference and writes for all these publications. I'm not yet an international speaker, but a lot of the people I talked about are. So, and these things can be fun outlets. They can be things that enrich your experience. They take a lot of work, but they can be really fulfilling. And I mean, how many trainers worry about staying in the industry? How many trainers worry about where's the next client coming from? It's fun to have a little bit more security and brand in the grander industry to where you're not worried about these things. You're earning a really great living. You can earn a phenomenal living in the industry if you're charging enough for your hour and you're in an environment where you're not working for a company that's taking more than 50% of your hourly worth, right? And a handful of other things. And I look at these things like, podcast hour a week or writing for a publication as leisure, as fun, right? I enjoy traveling to some of these conferences and hanging out with some people who have become great industry friends. So I find this stuff really enjoyable, fulfilling. And if it's something that you aspire to, you value, there's no reason why you can't achieve any of this stuff. It takes time. You can't take shortcuts. It doesn't happen overnight. A lot of the stuff started happening to me in year 7, 8, 9, 10 of my career.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with so much of what you said there. It's like, in particular, talking about like the industry, I think it's an amazing and very unique industry where there's people that almost rise up, as you said, into almost celebrity status. You've got people like Jordan Shallow, Luke Lehman in particular at the moment, and Pollock and previously, where in the way they've got this sort of cult following of celebrity status, but they're so accessible. And I've been lucky enough to get on calls with Jordan, and I consider Luke a good friend of mine. And most of that's through social media, attending conferences, attending their courses, and realizing that you are as much a part of this industry as they are, and all they did is take action on some of these things. And looking at the podcast, and you mentioning that, for me, this was something that was sort of 5 years in the making of, a bit of red tape, not being allowed to record stuff, but also me getting in my own way of not actually just clicking the record button, making it more complicated than it need to be, and thinking this was maybe an elite thing. And now it's quite humbling to see this icon next to your podcast, it's a few other guys' podcasts, and it's amazing how accessible this is if you take action on it.
Absolutely. You mentioned Jordan Shallow. Jordan's a young guy, right? He's still a pretty young guy. Yeah. He's achieved a lot in his career, big following, he's done really, really well. And I had him on my podcast a while ago. We connected through a friend, and Jordan and I are actually from the same place, a small island in Eastern Canada, Newfoundland. Not a lot of population. We didn't know each other from then. He's a bit younger than I am, but he's done extraordinarily well. So small world sort of stuff. And at the same time, as successful and confident as Jordan will seem, when I compared him to Mike Isertel, because I find they have a similar sort of humor and way of speaking, and suggest that I should have them both on the podcast together, Jordan was quite overwhelmed at the notion of any comparison with someone like Israel, who's also a very down-to-earth person, even if he is an intellectual powerhouse.
Yeah, I think I spoke to a couple of people like previously in this podcast. I've worked training trainers for a lot of my career, and like imposter syndrome is something that I think from people trying to get over in this industry is quite huge. And for me, it was a big part of my career until I realized that it was the imposter syndrome in a way that got me to where I am, a decade in the industry. It's the reason I go and seek out further education. The reason why I say at the start of this podcast, I've done all right getting a list of guests up, because I'm ballsy enough to just ask. And that comes from that imposter syndrome of, right, understanding it's not something that paralyzes me. It's the reason why I'm satisfied enough, but not quite. And that keeps pushing me to the next level. Have you found with your own career in terms of stepping up into podcasting, writing for T Nation, what you're doing on social media, that there's a little bit of that drive that sort of keeps you going? Or do you find that things like that halt people?
Imposter syndrome is virtually universal in our world. Okay. So I've spoken on this a number of times on podcasts, but it's worth restating. Anyone listening who sees successful industry leaders, you are seeing people who have a lot of reps. They've been around a long time. They've got a lot of practice. None of them started the way that they seem now. They're much, much better at their media. They're much, much better at their writing, their video, their speaking presentations, all of the above. You're also seeing a lot of people, and even though some of them will be raw and authentic, you're still seeing people who are very good at social media, and you're still seeing, to some degree, curated, examples of a lot of success. And when you compare that against your own experience, your own every doubt, just hyper awareness of every flaw you feel about yourself, every exaggerated flaw, that's never a fair comparison. So a lot of the people that you see that seem really powerfully successful and confident, they have their own doubts, their own struggles, and they have gone through a lot of that stuff. I believe that if you feel imposter syndrome, it is a great sign. It means you're a caring, passionate person, like you said, who's probably going to work really, really hard at getting better at your craft. And for some people, imposter syndrome never really goes away. And for others, it's a phase that they pass through. But I'm much more inclined to trust someone who feels imposter syndrome or has felt it than someone who has it or claims they haven't. Oftentimes, someone who claims they haven't, I think, is just pretending that they've never felt that way. So if you are experiencing it, know that the people that you look at who you're comparing yourself unfavorably to also experienced, have gone through it, and not everything is as great and as glorious as it seems on social media. There are some very successful people who showcase integrity, who are doing great, but there are also a lot of people who are putting on a complete farce and fabrication of what's going on in their world. Be very mindful that while there are a lot of people with real following counts, there's a lot of people who have bought their followers. It's a very common thing. They seed their follower pool. And if you see someone who has had a massive spike in followers, punctuated with periods of no growth whatsoever, who are sharing mostly just selfies of themselves without actually doing anything that's going to be shareable to attract more people, then you got to go, what's going on here? Anyone who's been around for my growth, I literally within the hour hit 17,000 followers on the nose. And depending on who you talk to, that's either a lot or not very many at all. And it took me a year and a half to go from about 3,000 to that 17,000 mark. And anyone who's hit in early has watched it grow steadily. It's hard fought. It's, any given post, no matter how successful or viral it goes, is rarely going to bring in, more than a few hundred people at a time. And, these monstrous spikes, that's an indication that someone's buying their following. And okay, it's also kind of like, well, who's on performance enhancing drugs? Well, really doesn't matter. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Worry about what you're doing. Focus on the things that you can do to make your media great and to share. But at least know that there are people who have taken shortcuts that if you are feeling inadequate or insecure because you don't have the following that some other people do, despite feeling like you're doing a good job, well, maybe you shouldn't feel so bad about it, because maybe, just maybe, they took a shortcut. So again, I'm not interested in, trying to judge or guess who did or who didn't, because you're thinking about the wrong things. You're focused entirely on the wrong things.
Yeah, I see this. You see this in businesses all the time, where people are looking outward at what other people are doing rather than looking what they're doing. And I think you made a really, really good point looking at imposter syndrome on social media, that you're seeing people's highlight reel, and sometimes it's the shortcuts, it's the deliberate facade. But a lot of the times it's like I don't really blame that, because it's like I take a photo of myself, the good ones end up on social media. Every single person on the planet puts up their highlight reel. I understand that no one's life is like that storyboard that they put up. And it's quite sort of inspiring looking at your growth in the last sort of 18 months, when, especially I've seen this, I know a lot of people see this on social media, you'll put up good informative posts and they'll get 1 to 2 likes, maybe a share. And you'll put up a picture of a dog or put up a picture of your abs and it'll get 100 likes. Your social media has almost grown entirely from written text, which is, I can imagine, an incredibly difficult thing to do. So what do you feel that set you apart from a lot of the other people that don't quite get as many shares doing the same thing?
There's a couple elements to it. And you're right in that the things that get the most sharing are the Twitter posts, right? There are a few elements to making those work. If you have a lot of things competing with your message, your picture's too large, or a ton of emojis, or a whole bunch of icons telling people to share and save or whatever, well, make it so fucking good that people know that they're supposed to share it or save it instead of having to explicitly tell them, right? You're cluttering it up and making it look busy, and then people aren't as likely to share it. And honestly, if your picture's too big or you got a custom graphic, people will share your message. They're not so much interested in sharing you and your face unless they're devoted fans, right? So there's that. And then there's all the stuff I talked about in the opening. If you have, it's one thing for someone to see a post in someone else's story they've shared, someone they follow, and they don't follow you. Let's say they click on your post and they're curious to see what else you do. There are certain things that validate their decision to follow you. The fact that people see, oh, he writes for all of the list of publications I just listed off. That right there can be the thing that goes, all right, I will follow. Or they find through the podcast, or they find my work on Mike Israetel sharing it on his wall, not in his story, but his wall. He's done that a number of times. And various other people in the industry have shared my stuff who are big names in the industry. And if you get an endorsement from someone with a very large following like that, that's a stamp of approval too. So while being really good at your social media, and I'll come back to that point, makes a difference. A lot of my growth was predicated on having developed a lot of other career capital that put me in a position to be able to create social media growth. I don't own a physical facility, despite the fact that people think I own Evolve. I'm just a contractor, and I own my home studio. I don't count that the same way as, say, Luca Hocevar owning Vigor Ground, which is a very real thing, or Pete Dupuis and Eric Cressy and owning Cressy Sports Performance, or any other number of examples of people who own physical facilities. Or, again, I mentioned Mike Israetel and Nick Shaw, who own Renaissance Periodization, or John Berardi owning Precision Nutrition, or Jonathan Goodman owning the Personal Trainer Development Center and the Online Trainer Academy. These are examples of career capital. Or someone like Danny Lennon, who has a very popular podcast, right? And I can go on through these types of things. You have someone who does really well on YouTube. Omar Isuf is a good example, if anyone's familiar with him, who's got a very good evidence-based background on YouTube. Jeff Nippard, same sort of thing. Ironically, Nippard is also from Newfoundland, like me and Shallow. So this tiny little Canadian provinces, produce some interesting folk in our industry. So these people, through all of the different things that they do, I think article writing is one of the biggest ones. If you're someone who has a track record and history of writing a lot of good long form articles and other forms of long form content, it backs up people's decisions to follow you, engage with your work. If you find somebody that, this person writes really good stuff, and then you dive in like, all right, what else is there? There's no articles, no podcasts, no YouTube. They don't own any other business, and they just, this is all they do. Okay, well, It's almost disappointing. So I'm a firm believer, if you want to build a successful brand in the industry, develop some things beyond just being good at social media. Now, like I said, I was going to come back to social media. Get really bloody good at writing and editing. Study writing, read books on writing. A lot of it is editing. Again, the Twitter posts work because they force you into a character limit. So you have to choose your words and your thoughts very carefully. And if you do that, you get much better at short form writing, which transcends into longer form. You're very thoughtful about removing word clutter and making your posts and your thoughts and your ideas stand out. It's pretty hard to come up with brand new earth-shattering ideas and philosophies around fitness. It's all been said before, but posts about how peanut butter is not a good source of protein, or how you should be kind to people on New Year's in the gym, newcomers. I literally had a post of that nature today. Or things about macros, or the benefits of strength training for women. These are fucking bland and ubiquitous ideas. And yet, if you write them and share them in a well-crafted fashion, people go crazy to share this everywhere. And then people have this way of, if they see something that's well written and a good thought, then they think, oh shit, I wish I wrote that. And then they share it. And after a while, you develop a reputation as being someone that people quite literally show up to see what you've written today. And they're very trained in the action of sharing your stuff. I have people who share every single fucking thing I post every day, right? Very, very devoted, very, very loyal. They love it. I could write something that's just complete rubbish as a joke, and I have people who would still share it. I don't do shit like that, but I know. But and that's earned over time. So it's practicing the art of writing, short form writing.
Yeah.
And if anybody find me on Instagram, shoot me a message, and I'll send you a few books, good books on writing that you can read to learn more about this skill.
I think that's like the editing thing, and really interesting is how you write it. It's often more important than what you're actually writing. I see a lot of posts where you have these really fancy graphics and they look really good, of like, 5 protein sources. And I'm like, but it's just information. It doesn't have any information about who this person you're talking to is, why they should care about this, why they should listen. And I've always thought, by looking at your posts you put up, like the vast majority of them are really, really, really good at just saying, like, yes, it's a 10, 11 words, but those 10, 11 words almost say, who is this for? What is it they're trying to do, and why can this help them? And I think that's the difference between 5 protein sources and what is this going to do to you in your story, in your life, to allow you to get better results.
Well, it's about making it about the end user, the person you're talking to. You mentioned storytelling a lot off air, and I don't consider myself an expert storyteller. I'll study aspects of it for sure. I think there are better people in the industry who know more about it than I do. But if you study and understand story, and of course, there's a bunch of good books on it. Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller is one of the best. Wired for Story. There's Story Driven. I swear there's one. There's a lot of books that do this sort of thing. And fundamentally, if you understand that you in your marketing, your media, you're not the star, you're the guide. I've talked about this numerous times on the podcast, and it's not even my own original ideas. Jordan Syatt's talked a lot about this, of the stuff that he's done. It's the hero's journey, right? It's you're Gandalf to Frodo or Bilbo. You are Obi-Wan or Yoda to Luke. As much as I detest all of the Skywalker characters, I think there are some of the worst popular characters. Han Solo is a cool character. Chewie is cool. Luke and Anakin and Kylo are the whiniest loser brat. In fact, what's weird is all these things. Like Frodo is a absolute total just beta loser. I'm sorry, someone's going to find that very offensive. Merry and Pippin are much cooler. They're more fun. The other 2 hobbits. Or Katniss in The Hunger Games. She's pretty badass. I like Katniss a lot. But what's the other classic one? Harry Potter.
They always talk about Harry Potter being it's quite a bland main character. to let the story ride out for him, not to take away from the story, is what J.K. Rowling used to say.
I like Harry, I do, but he gets to be an angsty, whiny little bugger, especially around book 5. So, and then Ron is, no, just can't do Ron.
I've watched them back, and I like Ron more. I like Ron more now. I've watched them back 5-10 years later than I did the first time around. But yeah, I agree. I do agree with you there.
I love his brothers. His brothers, the twins, are fantastic. Honestly, it's phenomenal storytelling. J.K. Rowling does a wonderful job with the entire story. And Snape is a fantastic character, and Sirius is a fantastic character, and Dumbledore's great, and and just up and down, you have a lot of really good characters. It works, but and again, compelling story, right? But just going back to sort of point of all this, you do want to make sure that your marketing is as much as possible geared around the person you're trying to help or your existing clients being the stars of the show, and you're the guide. Because if you make everything, you're the center of attention, you're the hero, you're the star, well, it comes off as kind of narcissistic. And I'm sure it'll draw a certain type of people in, but is it going to draw in the type of people that want to work with you, want to hire you, and become really good enduring clients, right? And you can be narcissistic with your social media, fine, if that soothes your need to do that. But I think in the long run, you get a lot more traction, and you'll be more successful with your business if you make it about serving other people and sharing other people. Something I love to do as often as possible is share other people's work. If I have people in the industry who, I recently did a post, and I actually picked 9 of my friends. All of them have under 10,000 followers. Several don't post almost anything that's really shareable. It's kind of why they don't have big growth, but they're all industry presenters, all very well respected, well liked people within the core industry amongst the trainers. And someone like Robert Linkle, and maybe a lot of you guys haven't heard of Robert, but Robert specializes in training older adults. That's kind of a brand thing he does. He's an educator in that space. I first met him here when he came up to be the lead presenter at the NSCA's provincial clinic in Alberta. And we sat down to dinner and became very fast friends. And, he's done my podcast a few times, a really sweet guy. He's down in California. And he's one of the best people out there that teach you about how to work with older adults. What population is more lucrative and more in need of expert quality training than that population, right? They have the money to work with you. They have the need. 2 of my guys they're going to be with me as long as they're alive. They literally said it. They're both 70-year-old retirees. They're fun to work with. Anybody who watches my social media will see me post Larry. Larry's a lot of fun. He squats and deadlifts a lot of weight for a 7-year-old. And it's a fun experience to train these guys. They're also very, very dedicated, secure clients. And you need a certain amount of that in the long run to do well. Because if your marketing is for teenagers, well, that's great. And if you want to blow up on TikTok, TikTok is a growth platform right now. It's easy to gain massive following. It's not something I choose to, because there's only so much time we have to do all these things. So I think it's kind of silly when, people, there are experienced trainers who act as gatekeepers when they belittle the song and dance of TikTok. Okay, cool. Some of that shit's pretty stupid, but you can still make videos where you're talking and do it with integrity, even on a medium like TikTok. Double it back to your reels on Instagram. Boom. You get double for your time and effort. But if you are trying to attract teenagers, well, how many teenagers have the resources to hire you as a trainer? And how many of you want to be working with teenagers? I mean, young athletes, sure, but again, that I have some young athletes. They're great. It's their parents paying the bills. But there are limits to just how much young athletes are going to come and work with inexperienced trainers. You either have to have an existing relationship or have developed a very strong brand around working with that population. And entry-level trainers or people who are a little bit new to it, it's going to take you a while to get there. I'm running a bit far afield here, but give some serious thought as to who you are trying to gear your message towards, your marketing, your image towards. And if you notice that it's mostly about you, is that serving your best interests long-term to have a successful business? How many trainers are always worried about their income? They're frustrated because their income isn't stable, right? And then they start doing shit like, putting in monthly rates for their training instead of session blocks. Cool, that's fine for some. And I think there's a lot of merit to subscription models as a future of business, but it doesn't guarantee that someone's going to stay with you. It's a major decision to allot a certain amount of money per month of training, on a monthly basis or a renewal basis. You need to be doing one hell of a great job of giving this person results and making sure there's a great relationship. They trust you. They really like spending their time with you. And yeah, if it's renewing session blocks and your income is a little bit inconsistent, okay, smoothing it out month to month still doesn't fix the underlying problem of, are you doing a really good job of showing your skills and knowledge to more people? Are you gaining referrals for your existing clientele base and your networks? And are you keeping your existing clientele happy? And if the answer to a lot of that stuff is no, that's where you should be putting your time and effort.
I think the interesting there, we're talking about like showing yourself on social media and whether you should. I think, in my opinion, it comes down to how will you show yourself on social media? If we talk about right at the start of this conversation about the people being the highlight reel and almost coming across narcissistic in their tone, if your image of posting yourself on social media is your abs and your cool holidays and your fancy car, it's like, how accessible is that to the people that may want to work with you? I know that, for a while, because a lot of the work I've done is now owned by another company. Like, a lot of my initial social media growth was very graphic heavy, and I realized someone wouldn't even know who I was. And the people that I've taken on, recently, I've asked, like, what is it about my social media that made you come and message me rather than however many coaches there are on Instagram? And it came down to a lot of, like, when you do share stuff about you, it's very genuine, it's very honest. I'll share my flaws, I'll share the bad stuff. It's not always the highlight reel. And I think looking at a little bit of what you do and how you do that, even through your posts, like, even on this podcast, you have mentioned more other people than you have spoken about yourself in the half an hour here. And you can see that with how often you share other posts. Even the voice notes you sent me back and forth over before this recording, it was listing names of other people. And I think that comes across as, you come across as a genuine person. And in turn, even through little short text message posts, people get a vibe of what your actual personality is like, not, I can deadlift this much, my biceps are this big.
I hope that somebody's personality, demeanor, authenticity will shine through if you see enough of their media. I think a really great example is The Rock, right? Dwayne Johnson. If anybody follows him and thinks, oh, this guy is an arrogant, narcissistic motherfucker, it's like, what are we watching the same person? He's as successful as humans get, and yet he seems to be authentically positive and genuine, right? And he's not one of these guys that has all these stories circulating about what a legendary douchebag he is. There are some famous people, and we get that. Okay, fine, it is what it is. But I think if you use The Rock as an example, you can, through the grander either of seeing enough of someone's stuff, get a true sense for them. And I think you're right. If you are more about sharing other people, then, and again, there's a lot of my industry friends, really, really successful people. It's really mostly centered on themselves. It doesn't make them, anything wrong with that. I think some people are wired not to think in that abundance mindset and just sharing as much as you can about other people's stuff. And I'll even say this, like, I've got some pals who can't keep their shirts on in their media. If a lot of your listeners are in the UK, Gareth Sapstad, the fitness maverick, right? He's another T Nation guy. And Gareth is a sweetheart. He's a really, really cool dude. Looks great shirtless. And then I recently brought Ben Mudge into T Nation. I did an article with him, and I had him do the videos because he's really good on video. He also couldn't keep his shirt on in the videos. And guess what? He looks the right. It's T Nation, right? It works out pretty well. They didn't mind that at all. And, he's got a big following, and he's got his little blue check mark that I love to tease about. And even still, if you follow those two guys and you get exposed to enough of them, you realize, wait a second, these guys are actually really down to earth, really genuine. Ben talks about his battle with cystic fibrosis, and the guy's in incredible shape. What? UFCF? Holy shit. And so, and either way, they're both doing really well in the industry, and they're both really cool people to follow. So, I think, yeah, every name that I've said in this podcast is a worthwhile social media follow, and dive even deeper into their stuff.
Yeah, and Ben is a ridiculously humble person. I met him at Body Power a few years ago, and every now and again, share a social media message. And he's similar similar in a way to The Rock on a smaller scale, in just the sense of like, he's got a lot of success in his career, a lot of success writing for publications. You know, he's got these, you know, really difficult battles with cystic fibrosis, and you won't, if he didn't talk about them, you wouldn't be aware of it on social media, because he comes across so positive and so life affirming. And that's the kind of people you sort of want filling your social media feed.
Totally. And he looks like Thor. So if anything, he's kind of more got the Chris Hemsworth sort of thing going on.
Yes, yeah, 100%. I going back a little bit what you were saying earlier on that I wanted to sort of touch on was the using the other mediums of, like, whether it's writing blog posts, whether it's podcasts, or whether it's things like this. I think that's a really, really interesting point, especially when looking at social media profile, because I know that I'm relatively new to the podcast game here, but I've been listening to podcasts for so many years. I can't even remember when I started listening to them. And a lot of it, I've gotten such a better idea of the individuals that are on these podcasts than I would to their social media. Like, I felt like I've known people, and I've never spoken to them my whole life, just because every Monday or every Tuesday I have an hour and a half where I listen to them have a conversation, probably more than half my friends and my family. And I think if they didn't have those things, I probably wouldn't feel as invested in their brand. And I think going back to writing through T Nation, that's something very, very similar. Have you found that more people have come to you through social media, or do you get more people still coming to you through the podcast or elsewhere?
I found that most people find me first through social media and then start diving into the other things that I'm doing. I've met a lot of people in my travels, so I've been able to forge a lot of connections that way. And the podcast was a thing before I really put a ton of attention into social media. So a lot of people came in through that as well, but it's hard to track now for sure. It's social media sharing, and then people are discovering, oh, there's this and there's this and there's this through the different publications. But sometimes people find me through the publication and then double back to social media.
Do you feel like moving, obviously we spoke a lot about social media, but delving into sort of like how, you know, that gets people into your business, that's people knowing your name, and obviously then you've got to run this business to keep yourself successful. And you mentioned earlier that, you know, a lot of people wondering where the next paycheck's coming from. I get the impression that it's not yourself. So like, how is like learning how to write, learning how to communicate, how do you feel those things translate across into actually dealing with your clientele on a day-to-day basis and getting them good results?
I mean, first of all, a lot of that stuff comes from, the ideas for it come from a lot of coaching experience. So I still believe that the client comes first, the coaching experience comes first, the business in front of you comes first. Doing well, you know, making a comfortable living doing it, then affords you the time, the bandwidth, the resources to do the other things, to be able to, spend time writing and getting published, to be able to travel to some of these events that I enjoy, to meet industry leaders and people who are in a similar path and trajectory I'm on. And I can't say enough about the value of doing this. Trying to curry the favor and get the attention of, the Jordan Syeds and the Mike Isertels of the industry is time poorly spent. I happen to have relationships with both of them through the Grander Either, but you best look around at people who are kind of similar social media following, on the same quest, trying to do the same things you are, because you never know who's going to turn around and explode into the next Jordan Shallow, right? Have a lot of success, who you are supporting and can then potentially help you. And it's not about keeping score. It's about sharing and supporting other people without any expectation or scorekeeping of what's coming back your way. If you are someone who genuinely believes in and applies abundance through all your dealings, a lot of good tends to come back your way through the Grand Either, right? So it may not be one for one in any individual relationship. So again, I think that these other things are bonuses. They're cool things you get to do. I'm going to close my window because my neighbor is about to start his lawnmower. Oh, well. You can go in the background, guys. I apologize. I hear him giving a rip on it, and there it goes. Where was I? Yeah, getting to do all these things are a bonus on top of, being a trainer. Once you reach the point where you get to do this stuff and you gain some traction with them, then sure, it may, in the eyes of some of the people who want to work with you, validate you as a good coach. It can help you attract online clients, for example, I occasionally get an online client who reaches out because they've read something I've written on T Nation. They like my philosophy. Okay, cool. Then I have an online client. Great. But I still believe that doing a great job on the floor with the client in front of you is still what is going to keep you busy, the referral business, and the referral network that you generate. And all this other stuff, then it reaches critical mass through your social media, be it your Facebook or Instagram or whatever else you're doing, your website, that you develop a reputation as being someone who has, and I hate thinking in terms of status games, so I try not to, but people do think in these terms. You achieve a certain status in people's minds that, well, then you're an obvious person that someone wants to refer business to or wants to go train or seeks you out.
I think you saying you don't like the use of the status game. It sort of depends on is your work giving you a status, or do you think that the status is going to give you the work? And all the people I know that have gotten to a certain level in this industry, you find that their social media, the reason why their social media is so good is because they've done such good work with their clients. That becomes most of their social media game, which in turn has given them a status. They've not tried to have a status. They've just done, like Jonathan Goodman, BDDC, like just do a great job and make sure everybody knows about it.
And I'll add to that thought. If you're someone who tries to shortcut the status, and it goes back to things like buying followers or just doing just one social media, right? Then if you are hacking the process and skipping forward, and there's not a lot of substance behind you in terms of coaching experience, working with clients, delivering results, or having developed and shared media information knowledge, that starts to show, and people figure it out along the way. So you can't really fake it. And I don't believe in gatekeeping. The second time I've made that reference. And I think there are people in the industry who like to say things like, oh, you have to coach for a minimum of 5 years on the gym floor before you have the right to be an online trainer. That's bullshit. I mean, I think it's valuable to be an experienced coach to be able to do a good job online, but I don't believe in any arbitrary, numbers or timeframes. I mean, is it 5 years of coaching 20 sessions a week, or is it 5 years of coaching 40, or 5 years of coaching 50? Like, which is it, right? Like, can you do 5 years at 25 sessions a week, or can you do 2.5 years at 50? Like fuck that shit, right? Don't think that way. I think if anything now, especially with what's happened the last year and a half, to say to a trainer who's been working 6 months to say, oh, you don't have the right to train your clients online, when you've literally been had your gym shut and those clients like your relationship, you've been able to take good care of them, on a gym floor. And then all of a sudden you train them virtually or build programs for them in, the traditional online coaching model. Of course, you've got the right to do online coaching, right? So it's like anything. I mean, honestly, most trainers stepping into the gym floor on day one don't have enough experience to train people, but everybody's got to start somewhere. So online's no different. It can be more challenging. It is more challenging for sure. But if you, as you would apply yourself in your in-person coaching, work very hard at getting better and building a great relationship, being engaged and supportive of your clients online, you're going to get good at it. It's a skill that you develop just like any other.
I think the online coaching world, like I know a lot more of it now than I used to do. After almost a decade in the industry now, like I think there are very, very different skill sets in a way. Like even when it comes down to training and nutrition programming, as much as yes, you're looking at the big picture, you're writing programs for your clients, I think one-to-one training is very much more than micro. 90% of your time and effort with a client is focused on, are they stimulating the right muscle tissue? Is the form good? Can they train hard to failure? Whereas when you're kind of online, these lessons transfer over into trying to get some of that when you can't be with them in person, but it just becomes more the macro. This is right where you're going to be in 6 months, a year. And I think the coach I've become has become better by doing a little bit of both of these. So I've got a bit of a skill set of, right, how can you get the most out of today? But how can we get the most out of the next 3, 4, 5 years? I've learned a lot more of that via online. Do you find the skill sets sort of differ? And do you feel that the valuable of actually being I hate the term in the trenches, but actually on the floor or on the laptop actually complement each other?
I think they can be concurrently growing skills. The experience of knowing how clients function in the gym is valuable to understanding how they're going to work online, where you're not there to see them go through it in a real-time manner. I think it's all still rooted in your relationship with them, the trust that you foster with them. And the better the relationship is, the more you'll be able to encourage someone who's struggling to do certain things, whether that's in person or whether it's online, right? I think it can be a bit more challenging to create and foster a close relationship with an online client due to the nature of the interactions. But there's still a lot of ways you can show up to be very responsive, engaging. And I like to send, you mentioned voice messages over Instagram. I like sending voice messages to my clients. Hearing my voice versus reading everything in text form only are two different things. It's also a really good idea to have notes and logs of all the things you've done. So you have to have that. It can't all be voice because it's more challenging to go back and listen to all that versus scanning for information you're looking for. But it can go a long way to supporting a client if you're getting very personalized messages that have the warmth of a human voice and emotion in them versus the lack of emotion that often comes with text messaging.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really key point. We mentioned, a little bit about like the client story and the client's journey. I think that becomes even more important when you look at how you communicate with them. And I think the voice notes is something I remember being quite almost blown away by when I first shared one of your posts and how personal that was. And we probably might not have been sitting on this call if we hadn't had that voice note, because it's like, right, I'm going to spend my time to reply back to this guy because he sent something more personal than a templated message or just thanks, And I think when you're looking at how you do it with clients, I like the idea of taking notes from your client journeys. And it reminds me of someone I worked with a couple of years ago, a guy called Winston, who was recovering from pancreatic cancer. And I noticed very quickly on in his story, I was like, he's first before photo, he's looking off camera, he's looking at the screen. A lot of trainers wouldn't notice that, but I'm noticing he's not looking at me. And then as we sort of go through the process, I find his Instagram and it's just pictures of his wife. So if you found this guy's Instagram profile, you would have gone, man, she's got a weird name, because there wasn't a single photo. And I asked him about this. He goes, I hate photos of myself. And as he gets lean, as he's going through the process, he starts sending me selfies in the change room. So I'm like, he's changing his mind. So I eventually convinced him to book a photo shoot. And I thought, what a story from a guy that didn't like taking photos of himself to have a photo shoot booked. That's going to be amazing. A week before the photo shoot, the gym's all shut. And if I hadn't had a reason, and I hadn't remembered his story, if I hadn't remembered these little things that he'd mentioned to me, and I hadn't noted them down, I could have just gone, well, shoot's cancelled. You haven't got a gym to shoot at. But what we did instead is like, okay, let's go into Tamar Park. And if you don't know Hong Kong, Tamar Park's like right on the front of the harbour by the big wheel. And we did the photo shoot there. So we've got a guy who would never, ever take a photo of himself to now take a photo of himself comfortably with his shirt off in the middle of one of the most densely populated cities in the world. And that all came from just me remembering, I hate photos. That one sentence. And if I hadn't taken note of that, I probably wouldn't have got anywhere near the same Matt story. Or I might not have pushed him to lose those last 5 kilos to make him really happy, because when you got a little bit comfortable and realized it was sort of hard work, those are things that sort of push you that little bit of extra mile. I mean, have you found it with whether it's with your clients or whether it's with people that message you on social media, have you found similar stories where you remembering these things, or a voice note you said, or a thing you remember with a client check-in has got them a little bit more?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's really important to remember those little details, because I've heard lots of stories, and I know of a lot of coaches, especially in the online space, who they try to charge as much money as they can while doing as little as they can. Be it, using templates for programs is universal, because I have mental templates for different types of clients, although I write them all individually. But you can start with a template, but a lot of stuff is very cookie cutter, where it's just, here's the workout plan, pull it out of the folder, give the same, 5 bikini girls their same plan, their same nutrition, and then whoops, 2 of them know each other, they compared, and oops, they got the same thing for an individualized plan. We see tons of that stuff. And there are a certain tier of people who feel entitled to make as much money as possible off of slick media and do as little work as possible. I can't do that. I'm a workaholic. I love that end of it. And if you remember the kids' names or just specific details, there's or the things that they enjoy. Well, first of all, if you've got some stuff in common, I mean, I'm 6'2", 255 pounds. I look like something halfway between a men's physique guy and a bodybuilder. I don't compete. I'm neither. But I had a period of time years ago where I was really into World of Warcraft. I have several clients who love the new World of Warcraft, where they've gone back to Classic and now it's Burning Crusade again. And we talk about a lot of World of Warcraft because it's good nostalgia for me. I love it. And so it's something that I have to bond with a group of guys who, might otherwise not feel like they have a lot in common with me, because your typical, video game guy, and these are all guys in sort of the tech industry in one way, shape, or form. One used to work for BioWare, literally has worked on like the Mass Effect games, because BioWare is actually based here out of Edmonton, Alberta. And, we might not on the surface look like they have much in common, but the fact that I am totally into this geeky type shit, or I love Witcher, all of a sudden a lot of people are like, oh, wow, that's cool, right? We talked about Harry Potter earlier. Jordan Syatt used to post tons and tons and tons of Harry Potter stuff. He's a big fan of it, right? Which makes him very relatable to Harry Potter fans.
Yeah.
So, being relatable, again, it goes back into all the stuff we're talking about marketing and success or whatever. If you're really relatable, then people are going to be drawn to you, which distinguishes you from the other 10 guys who can teach a really good squat, teach a really good bench press, and show people how to deadlift.
Yeah, I think that's really important, even in the actual coaching game. It brought me back a memory. Like often, and you mentioned say being like 250 pounds, looking between a bodybuilder and a physique athlete, and I think that can easily, when someone comes to work with you one-to-one, could be quite intimidating, especially for someone who's scared and intimidated by the gym. And creating that bond, that a lot of people come in to personal trainers going, you're different to us. You like your chicken and broccoli. And it could not be further from the truth. And I often say to a lot of the guys who work with me, is like, I like pizza, donuts, and beer as much as the next person. But I've learned through discipline, when I turn it on, this is when I turn it on. And there are times where I still go out and have a drink. I spent a lot of time telling my clients about how my parents used to own pubs. I had a client that got a great result of me because she was stagnating for quite a while. And one time we were on just finishing off some workout, and I just mentioned about when I was doing a prep, my coach at the time gave me a Domino's pizza and a dessert. It's just sort of a mental break from dieting. And that was the moment, she said, when I started following the diets, because I realized that we were the same. You just took more action. And if I hadn't had that conversation with her, if I hadn't made it come across that at the time I was very lean when I was training her, and it was like, I could easily see as you're this person that always is on beast mode, always loves the gym, can't wait for his next piece of broccoli. I'm like, no, I don't even like chicken for the most part. But yeah.
It's funny you mention all that, but embedded in there is the fact that your parents own pubs, used to own pubs. So my dad owns a pub. That's my family business back in Newfoundland in Eastern Canada, right? Again, so small world connections.
Yeah, and like that's something I think that's very big for me. Like growing up, it's like my social life revolved around let's go to a country pub, because that's what you do in the UK, and that's nothing to do with my training history. I didn't touch a vegetable until I started learning to love the gym. That was what made me actually start looking at being healthy. And people think those things are sort of like a million miles apart. And I think what we've sort of covered in the whole of this episode today is just going through it's all how to make yourself relatable online becomes more necessarily important rather than what you're actually saying. Because if someone relates to you, they will always come back and want to learn more.
If I'm going to leave everyone with anything, is just make your social media an extension of who you actually are, the conversations you have with your clients, the way that you operate. And like we talked about with The Rock, I feel like his media is an extension of his personality, his work ethic, which is inviting. It's, it's not always relatable. It's aspirational, I think, is another way to do it. It's okay to be aspirational in how people see you and go, I would like to be like that. I don't believe in presenting this fake and superhuman persona online. I think the counterpoint to that also gets carried away, where it became trendy to cry in front of your story and share every personal difficult moment, and that shit gets kind of awkward too, right? There's being authentic, and then there's being so raw that people are just like, I can't handle this at all.
Yeah.
I think just show the human side, and then if you show enough of the human side, then you can show some of the extremely, the big lifts or whatever too. Like it's like on your media, if everything is your 1 rep max lifting all the time, well, again, it's about you. It's not relatable. Like the woman who's scared of entering a gym and sees someone my size, and that's all they have on their media, or they're posing photos on, in the mirror, they're like, well, that's not for me, right? That's intimidating. So instead, make sure that this woman realizes that you have a lot of empathy, and you speak a non-judgmental message, and there's a lot of valuable and actionable information through your media, and you work with people like her who are super relatable. And if people see all that stuff through your media, they're far more likely to say, okay, I'm going to have a conversation with him. I need to do this.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think that's a great place where to leave that conversation. I know you've got a date night planned, and I certainly don't want to take you away from that. One question before I ask about where people can find you, just because you've mentioned this a number of times, I've always wondered this. From a man who lives in Canada, who is a strength coach, what is it that makes so many good strength coaches come from your nation? From Poliquin to, Andrew Benoit to Stefan Gazolt to Jordan Shallow to yourself. What is it about Canada that seems to cultivate these phenomenally well-known strength coaches?
There's a few things. First of all, Poliquin is painfully overrated. While influential in his early days, this might sound like sacrilege, he turned into a bit of a vicious crackpot in his later days. So I think he's an important influence in the early going, but I only put so much stock in him. I think someone that a few people you missed on your list who are great coaches here, Canadians, are Christian Thibodeau.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Boyce, Dean Somerset's here with me at Edmonton. Sam Spinelli is a friend. He's out in British Columbia. Megan Calloway is phenomenal. She's out in British Columbia as well. And that's just another bunch. But it's also this
Christian
effect.
Just to add another name in there, Christian Maurice. I don't know if you're familiar with Christian Maurice. He did a seminar with us back at UP a number of years ago. And he does for a lot of Hollywood athletes. We couldn't directly talk about a lot of the people he's working with. But it's a really good, when it comes to nutrition, he's well worth looking into. He's not on social media much either, but really good.
And that can work against people too sometimes if they don't have a big social media presence. Yeah. I think we are a nation that values fitness as much as anywhere. I mean, Australia, I've always thought and New Zealand are very ahead of the curve when it comes to, being caught up in fitness, perhaps maybe a bit more on the aesthetic side of things, but I find they're quite progressive when it comes to fitness and lifestyle. But it's also what you notice. It's like you date someone who drives a certain type of car, and all of a sudden you notice that car is everywhere, especially after you break up with them, and then you notice are everywhere. Or you buy a certain vehicle, all of a sudden you notice everyone else who's driving one of those things. If you hold the perception in your mind, there's a lot of great strength coaches from Canada. We're a big geographic nation, but a smaller population. Then you're just going to take notice of all of them. Where, the US, which is full of people who are really good at marketing and branding themselves, is full of incredible talents up and down and around everywhere. If anything, it might be the absence of certain other nations around the world seeming to have these people. But then again, we also have this, I term it ethnocentricity, of we believe that we take notice of what's going on in our culture more, and we may not certainly have as much access to seeing all of the great coaches who are in Poland and Bulgaria and Russia. And guess what? These are nations that historically have been phenomenal at strength sports too, right? Highly influential. Sure. And, some of them have a little bit of a dubious track record when it comes to the Olympics and some of the doping stuff, but that doesn't, take away from the fact there's a ton of brilliant strength coaches, right? Like Klokov, for example, met him at my gym at Evolve one day, right? Klokov is quite legendary in that regard. Or, how many great Olympic lifting coaches are probably going to come out of China, because China is a really, really successful nation at strength sports. So we also don't know all of the great coaches who are in a lot of these nations. You got a country like Brazil. Now, I'm not like anywhere. I'm not sure. I can't validate that everything that's coming out of Brazil is super evidence-based, but they still are a nation that really values fitness and aesthetics as well. So there's going to be, that's going to grow fitness is growing in popularity in places like Brazil as well, and all sorts of other places in the world. We have more access and opportunity as coaches to see the people in North America and Western Europe.
I on the topic of Brazil, if you do know any people in Brazil that like listening to podcasts, I'm getting obsessed with the stats on Buzzsprout, and I'm in every continent now except South America. So if you do know someone that can download that podcast, I don't want to cheat and use a VPN to give me the world domination. So yeah,
it's doing this well. It's
Yeah.
getting a diverse array of guests on here, and more people will find you over time, to where all of a sudden you'll have, I look at mine, it's like, oh, I've got a few people in Macedonia. I don't know who's over there in Macedonia, but I do really well there. And I got listeners in Japan and up and down all over the bloody world. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, like the one I got in Kenya after the first episode. How does someone in Kenya find a podcast with one episode at the moment? Like unreal.
Well, again, all it takes is one person, right? And you get enough people on social media, and I've had conversations with people from virtually every part of the world, all over South America, Central America, Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and North America. So there are people out there who are interested in it. And while we aren't seeing necessarily as much of the media of the people who are doing a good job from some of these places, some of the people in these places are hungry for the best resources out there, and they're going beyond the local to find it.
So that closes us off nicely. So for people who want to know more about you and where to find these great posts that we're talking about, where's the best place to look for you?
My Instagram is the road. All roads lead from there. So Andrew Coates Fitness there. My website, though the old one is still active, it's being redesigned. So I'm not pushing it much until I get the redesign. I'll publish more articles on there, but it's www.andrewcoatesfitness.com. And then the podcast, again, you can find that on my Instagram, but it's the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast.
Yeah, cool. And there's tons of episodes on there as well. I was like scrolling through to see how many there were today, and I was like, oh, there's so many. So there's lots of good content.
There's a little over 40 under the redeveloped brand name. And then there's 150 with my old co-host, Dean, who his wife had a baby, so his life got really busy. So he wanted me to carry it on, and I renamed it, pulled it under my exclusive brand umbrella.
Yeah.
I'm proud of the guest list. It's a really great group of people, and a lot of good coaches for anyone who's working hard to develop their own brand or be successful in the industry. There's a lot of good people to follow and learn from.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to the John Berardi one as soon as we click off this. But thank you very, very much for coming on board. It's been a really, really good hour, and I enjoy the rest of your date night.
I appreciate it, my friend. Take care.